to you tonight live from New York is Chloe, and
I'm in Philly tonight. It's Vanessa, but next week we'll be reunited, and the hostesses of Invading and Little Bits community will be coming at you from the R&D lab.
Little Bits headquarters. So Ariel is here with us today. Ariel, welcome. Ariel makes massively multiplayer science, instigating unusual collaborations that spark clever creations for science and space exploration. She is the founder of spacehack.org, an amazing organization, a director of ways to participate in space exploration. She's also the global director of the Science Hack Day. I strongly recommend, if you haven't been to an event, a Science Hack Day event, to go. It's fantastic. It brings together scientists, technologists, designers, and people generally with good ideas to see what they can create in one weekend. And she also sits on the Council for NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts, a program that nurtures radical, sci-fi-esque ideas that could transform future space missions. She's basically a woman from the future. Welcome, Ariel. And so we're so happy you're here. We're going to talk a little bit about science and what that word even means, and then we'd love to hear more about all your work with spacehack.org, and then tackle some intriguing questions like the future of humans and our favorite species in the galaxy. So to start with, I really loved an article we posted also on the forums about our misconceptions around the word science, and how in a way that word is a little bit broken, because we consider science to be this holy thing and scientists to be this trained people. And I'd love to hear about your own pathway and how you see everyone being a scientist in some way.
Yeah, I mean, to me, yes, I often rant a lot about how, science isn't, science, I don't know, it got to this weird place where it's not seen as something that anyone can partake in. But with my own story, I have no background in science whatsoever. My degree is in graphic design. For a number of years, I worked at an ad agency in Kansas City. And then in 2008, I was watching a documentary called When We Left Earth on the Discovery Channel, and it was about NASA trying to figure out how to send people into space in the early days. And the thing that was really awesome about this documentary was the fact that they were interviewing all these now older men talking about how they were trying to figure out how to send people into space, and they were talking about how they didn't know anything about spacecrafts, they didn't know anything about orbits, they didn't know anything about rockets even, really. And they were figuring it out as they went along and trying to figure out how to send someone into space. And I was watching this and I was like, well, I don't know anything about space exploration. I want to work at NASA. That sounds awesome. And so I, very geekily, as I often do, sent a random email to someone at NASA that I had never met, saying that I was a huge fan of NASA, and if they ever needed someone like me without a science background, that I was around. Serendipitously, they created a job description for someone that day, specifically for someone who did not work at NASA, and they wanted someone to help sort of bridge the gap between NASA and other communities to help them collaborate. And so I got the job at NASA, and it was amazing and changed my life. And I had never in a million years considered working at NASA or considered doing anything with space or science. I wouldn't have even considered myself a science geek by any means. But working there really changed my perspective, and one of the most important things I ended up learning while I was at NASA was that I didn't actually even need to work at NASA in order to contribute to space. And so when I left NASA, that's when I created spacehack.org, which is a directory of ways to participate in space exploration. So that's been, I guess, how I got started on my path.
So speaking of SpaceHack, you mentioned in one of your talks, I think it's your Austin talk, about the different ways and modes to invade space, and I really love that metaphor. To me, it was invading space and also invading the word science. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about that.
Just about like space hack and other things, or
Yeah, how could our community invade space? Like, where would we start?
there's a lot of different ways. I mean, you know, there's to me there's a wide array. There's things like discovering galaxies or discovering new planets, which actually is a lot of like actually digging through data and making new discoveries with it, because it is a lot of space data is open and out there. It's not always in a great interface, which is why I love the Zooniverse and Galaxy Zoo and all those citizen science projects, because they take the data that's already out there and they put it in a great interface where it's actually a lot easier to sort of dig through it and find interesting things in it. There's other things like building the next generation of rovers. So there's a cool competition called the University Rover Challenge, which tasks university students all around the world to build the next generation of Mars rovers that could possibly be adopted and used for NASA or other space industries. And that's really cool, because I think one of the things that actually is missing both in space exploration and science is a little bit of like, I don't know what else to call it, but like a punk rock sense. Like a lot of times you get kids who are really excited about Mars rovers, and you tell them, oh, one day you could build a rover like that. But that's not what you should be telling them. You should be telling them, you know what, there's a billion different ways you could build a rover, and I bet you could build one that's even better than the ones that already exist. So actually thinking about, you know, what if rovers were more like tumbleweeds, or what if rovers were, you know, interacted more like drones, or, you know, that could, you know, go on the surface and also fly around. That's the stuff that I really love with a lot of these projects, is it's not really about saying, hey, you can do exactly what NASA and scientists are doing. It's actually, you can be a lot more creative and do things actually even better than they can sometimes. And there's no, I guess, just not accepting the status quo of how space and science is done, and actually realizing that there's a lot of different ways that you can contribute to it. So equally in this way, you know, hacking, whether it be, you know, using little bits or other tools, there's ways in which you can mash up data and prototyping and a bunch of interesting things to create essentially new insights into space exploration and science.
I think that's awesome, and so many people in the chat are really excited about Space Hack. Folks are discovering it for the first time, and people are really in awe of it. You have a number of different communities, creative, educational, scientific communities that you're a part of and that you've designed. And I heard you say that you know, one of the things you're really committed to is setting creative minds alight, like trying to get people to think outside the box and learn in different ways. How do you get people excited to dig in and work on space data? How do you make that idea come alive?
I mean, to me, it's really about just viewing space data as just another material, or just another material to manipulate, to work with, to play with, another fabric, I guess, if you will. To me, it's not so much about identifying as a space geek or not. It's just about knowing that you can play around with these things, and if you play around with it, you know, once, and you're like, that was fun, not really for me, that's totally fine. I'm less about trying to convince people to get excited about space, and more about coming to where people already are and just saying, like, you're awesome as you are. What if you did, you know, what you usually do and mash it up with space, or mash it up with a different science for fun? You know, do interesting things come out of that? So, you know, whether you're a fashion designer, or whether you're a marketer, or, you know, sort of any discipline that you're coming from, I think that's already awesome. And I think that's one of the issues that I often have with science and academia, is there's so much focus about getting people to pursue science careers, which is no doubt very important and should be made more accessible to people who really want to do that. But equally, I think there's just this blind spot for realizing that science can use everyone's help, And actually a lot of clever ideas and clever creations can come out of having people from completely different backgrounds, completely different disciplines, contribute what they already have, what they already know, their different mindset, their different perspective to science. And so that's what excites me is, you know, it's not about creating more space geeks. It's just about, you know, being able to play around with stuff even if you don't know anything about it.
Totally, and I'm just unmuting myself so you're not hearing the space sound that can happen on Google Hangouts sometimes. And this is a question that comes from one of our awesome community members, Leo, and I'm also very interested in the answer. And he says that in watching your OSCON speech, he was very curious about the part where you say open doesn't necessarily mean accessible. And so he asks, what do you think is the role of graphic design and UX interfaces into making open things more accessible? And I would actually, so interfaces, graphic design, and I would add, what other context do you think learners need to make open things more accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially, I mean, graphic design and user experience, obviously I'm a little bit biased since that's some of the work that I've done over my life, but huge role. And I think the thing that's really fascinating to see, for instance, at Science Hack Day, which is an event that I run, is seeing scientists who are convinced that they can't possibly communicate, you know, the gist of the science that they do or the work that they do over a weekend, and having them realize that actually designers especially can bring a lot to their work and actually can help them communicate even better and more clearly. But yeah, on open doesn't mean accessible. I mean, Galaxy Zoo is, you know, the perfect example. It uses data from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, so this big telescope, lots of data. That data is already available, but it wasn't until someone actually built, you know, this interface to it, and this is probably in my OSCON talk, I gave it a while ago, but you know, it wasn't until someone actually built the interface to Galaxy Zoo that it really made it accessible for, you know, tons and tons of people to be able to collaborate on it and actually find things with it. So user experience has a huge role, graphic design has a huge role. Equally, just different technologies like Arduino and you know, other things like Littlebits is doing is just, I don't know, it's really huge because those also can make science a lot more accessible. So I guess my frustration, you know, in my OSCON talk, and it's getting a little bit better, but there's still a long way to go, is that there's been so much focus on making science open, but it doesn't really mean anything if it's not accessible. And if you hack around with space data like I have over the last few years, you see that come up time and time again. There's stuff that's open, but it's near impossible either to understand it, or the format that it's in is completely useless, or it just doesn't work with modern technologies very well. You know, a variety of problems come up, and thus it means nothing. You know, if it's something where only it's open, but only a select privileged few can figure out how to work with the data, then it's not actually enabling proper open science, so to speak. So I think, you know, I think the thing that's been interesting to see with Science Hack Day, with that event, you know, it's this 48-hour hackathon where, you know, scientists, designers, and developers get together in the same physical space to see what they can prototype in 24 consecutive hours. The thing that's awesome to see is that a lot of people assume that at an event like that scientists would be mentors, but there's no mentors. Like, scientists are learning just as much as designers and developers are about new things, and that's what I love so much, is that scientists are not coming to this event as like the know-it-alls. They are on the exact same playing field as everyone else, and so everyone is in the sort of like slightly intimidated, slightly unsure stage of trying to figure out new things and new ways of communicating, new ways of prototyping stuff, and it's just really awesome to see, because I think it creates a lot more, I don't know, just a lot more fully baked ideas and concepts.
I have a question for you. Like, you've done so many of these events. Like, what was the most unexpected way that somebody used like data, like open data from space?
From space. Okay, one that I liked that was more recent. I mean, there's a lot of different ones that have been really fun. One that was like a People's Choice Award about a year ago was a group of people put together. They used data of all the satellites that are currently overhead. And so they created a website where you could go, you could type in any location in the world and you could see what satellites were currently overhead of that location at any given moment. But what they did is they actually set those satellites to sounds and music. So based on how fast they were going and how far away they were, the satellites would create, a bit of like, music. What was really cool about that, I thought, is actually, you're in your office, you're in your home, you often hear the whizzing of cars going by, and during rush hour, you can hear like honking and stuff going on, and you get a sense, just like an ambient sense of how busy it is outside, but you never really have that sense of how busy it is over your head at any given time, how much clutter there is above you. And so I really liked that. It was something where maybe it's not going to become like this incredibly useful tool, but just as being more aware of what's happening in space at any given time, I think is a really cool concept.
Love this. I love the awareness plus application, and I love the how at Space Hack Day everyone's a learner. Like the experiences you design make everyone sort of equal and need to participate with each other. I just think that's so awesome. Our community has lots of questions for you.
Okay.
First off, there is one from Gail, and she said, pardon the pun, but what do you see is the frontier in discovery of space for kids?
For kids, I mean, I think it's kind of, to me, what I was talking about with sort of like viewing space, I don't know, having a more punk rock view of what's currently happening. So sort of looking at like what NASA is doing and not accepting that that's the only way to do something. So looking at how they either send humans into space or looking at how they send robots to other planets, and saying, well, what if we made a rover that was like, I don't know, like a frog, or like what if we made things that pulled from different aspects of nature and actually sort of combine that to explore planets better. To me, that's the really exciting thing, and the thing that I often find is missing in education is that it's too, and this is my personal opinion, it's too focused on pointing to awesome things, getting kids excited, and saying you could do something exactly like that. I want to see more of pointing to things that are awesome, getting kids excited, and saying you could probably build something even better because no one ever said this is the only way to build something. Sort of just no longer accepting that there's a status, I don't know, status quo is the wrong word, but no longer accepting that there's one way to do things. Because you look at NASA rovers and they do kind of all look alike. They're car-like, they've got like a little spindly head, and there's nothing that dictates that's the best way to explore other planets. And so that's really what I think is exciting and also missing a little bit from education with kids is actually, saying there's no specific way to do space exploration. And I think you see that in different parts of, kids' education, but I think a lot of times when it comes to science, there's like this viewpoint of like, oh, NASA is always going to have the best idea, you can't beat them. And that's just simply not true.
Yeah. I love this. This is actually the focus of a couple things going on in the Little Bits community this week. In the science track, the assignment is create something that communicates with one of your lost astronauts. The one track is reading Epistemological Pluralism by Sherry Turkle and Seymour Papert about how there are multiple ways to learn. So this is touching on lots of things that's going on in the community. What do you think about folks like SpaceX? Like, what's your opinion of alternative forms to, for profit or other organizations that are trying to get into space?
I think it's great and it's really needed. I think especially when thinking about, you know, really big goals, so things like landing humans on Mars, which is an incredibly difficult goal, often is underestimated how difficult it is. When you talk about things like that, you really begin to talk about having to see collaboration come together on an unprecedented level. So no longer are things like where one nation and one nation alone, without the help of other nations and without the help of the commercial industry, can accomplish, you know, large goals like that. You actually have to see people come together in ways that you haven't seen in space exploration before. So absolutely, you know, companies like SpaceX are just necessary to move the needle forward. It's really, you know, it's not just a nice to have. I think it really is a requisite for the future of space exploration.
Right on. Awesome. We have one more question for you before we let you go. And I just wanted to let you know that previous question was from Jason. Jason F, I believe. Yes. So, and Jeff B has a question. How does the slow adoption of new technology hinder our exploration of space?
Yeah, that's a good question, and also one that definitely expands to science in general, not even just space. I think you see it. It hurts in a lot of ways, and it's really sad when I think about it. One of the ways in which it's hurting is that the science industry, I won't talk about space specifically because I really think this is as wide as science, really doesn't know how to hire people that can really help and make active contributions. And by that I mean the fact that, you know, in science, the way reputation has been sort of seen as, you know, this publish or perish model, that's fine, but it would be fine if it incorporated and embedded new technologies. So taking into account people utilizing GitHub, taking into account actually things that people are building in their spare time. You know, the fact that the science industry doesn't really take that into account into someone's reputation and someone's hireability and someone's desirability, more importantly, it hurts because, you know, inherently science is about people. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, and that's what I try and tell people about with my projects, is that it's not actually about these braggable prototypes. You know, prototypes are great, even better if you create a new solution for science that no one's ever created before. But ultimately, what you're actually building is, you know, amazing, awesome people and elevating people. And so equally, you know, with the science industry not adopting new technologies, I think where that hurts them the most is actually by missing out on amazing people. And it's really people that make amazing science. And, you know, that might seem a bit generic, but I really mean it quite seriously.
So we lied. We actually have one more question before
okay.
we let you escape.
I'm here all day.
To bring the conversation back to our community, and a lot of folks in this community are noobs. We're noob lovers. We have many different tracks, but the folks who are new to little bits are the most successful and most active. How do you see little bits prototyping relating to participating in learning about space, participating in the science around space? What have you seen? What's the potential there?
I mean, to me, it's great and huge because, I mean, to me, you know, I'll say I'm not being paid by little bits here, but like the genius of little bits is that it minimizes things that were already seen as easy. So Arduinos are seen as generally easy within the tech hacker community, and they are, but it minimizes things that were already seen as easy to being even easier and even simpler. So the amount of time it takes you to set up something with little bits, so set up a blinking light with little bits, is next to none. And that's important because really the closer you can get to this sort of pen on paper ideal of the second you have an idea, you can write it down, you scribble it down, when you can get to that sort of like flow with something where your concepts sort of can be drawn out with little electronics really quickly and not even knowing anything about electronics, I think that's huge. So for instance, the very first idea that I wanted to prototype at a Science Hack Day years ago was a light that lit up every time an asteroid flew by the Earth. So for me, it was like a near-death lamp. And so the concept was pretty easy. It was like, you know, take a lamp, take like an Arduino, hook it up to a data set that's already actually on Twitter. There's a Twitter account called Low Flying Rocks that tells you every time there's an asteroid flying by the Earth, which is fairly often. And so every time, you know, an asteroid would come by the Earth, the lamp would light up. You could freak out your coworkers and go like, "Oh my God, the asteroid's coming! Everyone, you know, dive under your desk or something." Something simple like that. And I remember in 2010, working with a friend, Nathan and I, we tried to, you know, prototype it. We used plastic cups and we used all these LEDs, but it took all these wires and it, you know, it was simple, but it could have been simpler. And so now there's stuff like with Little Bits where you can just say like, oh yeah, I've got the light, I've got, you know, the Twitter account, I've got the, what is it, the cloud, this, I don't know, some cloud, yeah, the cloud Little Bit. Like you use that, you know, and you just hook it up to the Twitter account, you hook it up to the light, and just, you're done. And then you're like, then you can be like, oh, that was a cool, stupid idea, on to the next one, as opposed to it being the only like idea that you spend, you know, a whole week on or something like that. And so that to me is what's really key. You know, electronics are great, but it's more about just bringing as many mediums as you can to be that sort of pen on paper level of interaction, so that the stuff you're prototyping with doesn't get in the way of your ideas.
The stuff that you're prototyping with doesn't get in the way of your ideas is actually, I think, a perfect quote to sum up like the sort of the thread of the conversation that we had here. And I also think that you said something a couple times, the punk attitude, the very DIY attitude towards learning, which is something that I think that this community shares with the Space Hack community, sort of taking the learning into your own hands and working on it. Low floors, wide walls, as Mitch Resnick would say. We want to thank you so much for coming and answering all of our pepperings of questions. And we will post the video in the forums later, so you can go out and share it.
Right on. Thank you so much, Ariel.
Yeah, thank you guys.
We'll see you soon. Bye.
All right, bye.
That was amazing, Vanessa. I don't know if you agree. I'm pretty sure you do.
Oh my God, she's so awesome!